"More water, sir?" Savannah asked, her voice a steady, practiced whisper. She leaned over the table, shielding her movements with the silver pitcher. She didn't look at his eyes. She looked at the pristine white napkin resting near his expensive watch. With a sleight of hand born of years carrying heavy trays, she slid the folded square of receipt paper directly under his thumb. Joshua paused, his conversation with the two imposing men opposite him halting for a fraction of a second. Savannah stepped back, her face a mask of professional indifference, though her heart hammered against her ribs. On the paper, in hurried blue ink, were the words, "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." The dining room of L'Etoile was a symphony of hushed wealth, a place where fortunes were quietly transferred over plates of truffle risotto and glasses of impossibly old Bordeaux. Savannah stood at the service station, the faint scent of polished mahogany and expensive perfume filling her lungs. Her feet ached, a dull, pulsing reminder of the grueling 12-hour shift she was enduring. But her posture remained flawless. In a place like this, you weren't just a waitress. You were a ghost, an invisible entity meant to anticipate needs without ever interrupting the delicate flow of power. Savannah had worked here long enough to learn the language of the room. She could read the subtle tension in a clenched jaw, the nervous tapping of a manicured finger, or the dangerous stillness of a man who held absolute control. Tonight, that man was sitting at table 4. His name was Joshua. Savannah knew the names of all the high-profile regulars, though she would never utter them aloud. Joshua did not look like the brutal syndicate leader the whispered kitchen rumors claimed him to be. He possessed the polished, immaculate aesthetic of a Fortune 500 CEO. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that draped perfectly across his broad shoulders, his dark hair meticulously styled. He spoke softly, never raising his voice, yet the two men sitting across from him leaned in, hanging onto his every syllable as if their lives depended on it. And perhaps, Savannah thought as she wiped down a silver serving tray, they did. The atmosphere at table 4 was heavy, distinct from the relaxed, joyous celebrations happening at the surrounding tables. The two men accompanying Joshua were rigid. The older one, a man with a thick neck and a face scarred by past violence, kept adjusting his silk tie. The younger one continuously checked his phone, placing it face down on the linen tablecloth, only to pick it up again seconds later. They were negotiating something monumental. Savannah could feel the static electricity of a high-stakes deal radiating from their corner of the room. Joshua, however, remained an impenetrable fortress. He took slow, measured sips of his sparkling water, his dark eyes analyzing his companions with chilling detachment. The heavy, brass-studded front door of the restaurant chimed softly. Savannah glanced up out of pure habit. The man who walked in did not belong at L'Etoile. He was dressed in a heavy, dark wool overcoat, an absurd clothing choice for a remarkably humid, unseasonably warm autumn evening. But it wasn't just the coat that caught Savannah's attention. It was his eyes. They were cold, dead, and scanning the room with terrifying precision. He wasn't looking for a hostess to seat him. He wasn't looking at the ornate crystal chandeliers. He was looking for a specific target. Savannah watched as the newcomer's gaze locked onto table 4. The man's right hand slid smoothly into the deep pocket of his heavy coat, and the thick fabric bulged in a way that made Savannah's blood run cold. It was the unmistakable heavy shape of a suppressed firearm. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood. She knew what a concealed weapon looked like, and she knew the posture of a man preparing to use one. Panic, sharp and icy, spiked in her chest. She looked back at table 4. Joshua was entirely focused on the older man speaking to him, his back completely exposed to the entrance. But it was the reaction of Joshua's two dining companions that solidified the horror of the situation. The younger man, the one who had been nervously checking his phone, briefly flicked his eyes over Joshua's shoulder. He made direct eye contact with the man in the overcoat. A microscopic, almost imperceptible nod was exchanged. The older man with the scar subtly shifted his weight, pressing himself deeper into the plush leather booth, creating a clear, unobstructed line of sight from the entrance to the back of Joshua's head. It was a setup, a beautifully orchestrated, completely silent execution waiting to happen in the middle of a crowded five-star restaurant. Savannah's mind raced. The golden rule of her job was to never interfere, to remain a shadow. If she screamed, if she caused a scene, she could be the first one shot. She had rent to pay, a younger sister depending on her, a life she was desperately trying to hold together. The safest, smartest thing to do was to turn around, walk into the bustling kitchen, and let the violent world of these men resolve itself in blood. It wasn't her problem. It wasn't her world. Yet, as she looked at Joshua, a man who, despite his ruthless reputation, had always treated the staff with quiet, polite respect, a fierce, undeniable surge of conscience anchored her feet to the floor. She could not stand by and watch a man be murdered from behind. She couldn't let the immaculate dining room turn into a slaughterhouse. Operating on pure, trembling adrenaline, Savannah moved. She ducked behind the service station, grabbing a small, square piece of blank receipt paper and a blue ballpoint pen. Her hands shook violently as she pressed the pen to the paper. She had no time to explain, no time to write a novel. She needed to convey the absolute terror of the moment in as few words as possible. Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. She folded the paper into a tiny, tight square. She grabbed a silver water pitcher, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handle. She took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her face into the blank, pleasant mask of a high-end server. She stepped out from the station and walked toward table 4. Every step felt like she was wading through thick mud. The man in the overcoat was advancing slowly, weaving past the oblivious diners, closing the distance. 30 feet. 20 feet. Savannah reached the table. She positioned her body perfectly, blocking the younger associate's view of Joshua's hands. "More water, sir?" she murmured, pouring the ice water into Joshua's crystal glass. She didn't wait for his answer. With a swift, fluid motion, she slid the folded paper directly under his thumb as it rested on the table. She stepped back instantly, terrified that she had just signed her own death warrant. Joshua's conversation stopped, his thumb pressed down on the coarse paper. Savannah turned away, walking briskly toward the kitchen, praying with every fiber of her being that he would read it before the man in the coat pulled the trigger. Joshua did not gasp. He did not flinch. Decades spent navigating the treacherous, blood-soaked upper echelons of the criminal underworld had conditioned him to mask his physiological reactions. When he felt the foreign texture of the folded paper slide beneath his thumb, his face remained entirely placid. He finished nodding at the older associate's fabricated proposal, his mind simultaneously splintering into a dozen rapid calculations. The waitress, Savannah, he recalled from her name tag, had always been professional, entirely detached from the clientele. For her to risk her job, and potentially her life, to pass him a note meant the threat was not merely imminent, it was absolute. Keeping his eyes locked on the men across from him, Joshua used the pad of his thumb to gently unfold the small square of receipt paper. He didn't look down. Instead, he subtly shifted his posture, bringing his polished silver butter knife an inch closer to his plate. He used the curved, reflective surface of the silver to catch a distorted glimpse of the paper. "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." The words burned into his consciousness. He didn't need to turn his head to verify it. The sudden, suffocating silence of the younger man across from him, the rigid tension in the older man's jaw, It all made perfect, horrific sense. The meeting wasn't a negotiation, it was an ambush. They had lured him out of his fortified territory, separated him from his heavy security detail under the guise of an intimate, high-trust sit-down, and brought a cleaner to finish the job. Joshua needed a distraction, and he needed it in a fraction of a second. If he reached beneath his jacket for his own weapon, the man behind him would fire. He had to disrupt the environment. With a practiced, fluid motion, Joshua reached for his wine glass. Instead of lifting it, he drove the heel of his hand hard against the base. The delicate crystal shattered instantly, dark red Cabernet exploding across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the expensive suits of his betrayers. "Damn it!" Joshua hissed, standing up abruptly, playing the part of the annoyed, distracted patron perfectly. The sudden movement and the shattering of glass caused the entire restaurant to flinch. For a microscopic second, the man in the overcoat hesitated, his target suddenly moving erratically. The two associates at the table recoiled from the spilling wine, their carefully laid plan momentarily derailed by a seemingly mundane accident. That single second of hesitation was all Joshua needed. In one continuous, explosive motion, Joshua kicked his chair backward, driving it directly into the path of the advancing gunman. Simultaneously, his right hand blurred beneath his tailored jacket, drawing a compact, suppressed 9mm pistol from his shoulder holster. He didn't fire blindly. He gripped the heavy edge of the solid mahogany dining table and heaved upward with monstrous strength. The table flipped vertically, plates, silverware, and heavy centerpieces launching into the air as the thick wood became a barricade. A suppressed gunshot coughed a sickening thwip sound, and a bullet splintered the mahogany right where Joshua's chest had been a millisecond prior. Chaos ignited. Women screamed, patrons dove beneath their tables, and the elegant dining room descended into absolute pandemonium. Joshua dropped into a crouch behind the overturned table. He peeked around the edge, his pistol raised. The gunman in the overcoat was recovering from tripping over the discarded chair, raising his weapon for a second shot. Joshua fired twice. Both rounds hit the gunman squarely in the chest, the kinetic impact throwing him backward into a dessert cart, sending a cascade of pastries and shattered glass across the floor. But the threat was not eliminated. Joshua saw the younger associate drawing a weapon from his waistband. However, the associate wasn't aiming at Joshua. He was aiming toward the service station. Joshua tracked the associate's line of sight and felt a rare spike of cold dread. Savannah. She was frozen near the swinging kitchen doors, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the violence she had inadvertently unleashed. The younger associate had seen her pass the note. He knew she had blown the hit, and in their world, loose ends were burned immediately. "No!" Joshua roared, a sound that cut through the screaming. He didn't think, he reacted. Joshua vaulted over his makeshift barricade, exposing himself to enemy fire. The younger associate fired, the loud, unsuppressed crack of a revolver deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet shattered a mirrored pillar inches from Joshua's head, showering him in silver shards. Joshua didn't break his stride. He leveled his weapon and fired a single, precise shot that took the younger man in the shoulder, spinning him violently to the ground. Joshua closed the distance to Savannah in 3 massive strides. She was paralyzed, trembling so violently she looked as if she might collapse. Joshua grabbed her upper arm, his grip like a steel vice. "Move," he barked, his voice devoid of warmth, entirely commanding. Savannah let out a choked sob, her feet glued to the floor. I can't." "They saw you," Joshua said, pulling her forcefully toward the swinging doors. "If you stay here, they will kill you. You're coming with me." He didn't give her a choice. He shoved the heavy metal door open with his shoulder, dragging Savannah into the blinding fluorescent lights of the kitchen. The heat was oppressive, filled with the smell of searing meat and panic. Chefs and line cooks were scrambling, dropping pans, shouting in multiple languages as the gunfire echoed from the dining room. Joshua navigated the narrow, greasy aisles with terrifying speed, keeping Savannah tucked slightly behind his broader frame. He kept his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the stainless steel prep stations for any other threats. "Back door!" Joshua yelled at a terrified sous chef cowering near a walk-in freezer. The man simply pointed a shaking finger down a narrow hallway. Joshua pulled Savannah along, her black, non-slip work shoes squeaking against the wet tiles. They burst through the heavy fire exit door, leaving the suffocating heat of the kitchen behind and plunging into the humid, rain-slicked darkness of the back alley. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the screams, but Joshua knew it was only a temporary barrier. The hunt had just begun. The alleyway was a stark, jarring contrast to the opulent dining room they had just escaped. It was narrow, suffocatingly dark, and reeked of rotting produce and stagnant rainwater. A steady, warm autumn rain had begun to fall, slicking the cobblestones and casting distorted reflections of distant streetlights. Savannah stumbled as the heavy metal door slammed shut, gasping for the humid air, her lungs burning. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a bird trapped inside her ribcage, battering itself against the bone. Joshua did not pause. He released her arm, moving with a silent, predatory grace toward the mouth of the alley, where a sleek black sedan was idling in the shadows. This was his contingency, his armored extraction point. "Stay against the wall," Joshua commanded softly, his eyes scanning the fire escapes and the dark windows above them. Savannah pressed her back against the damp brick, the rough texture snagging her uniform. She watched as Joshua approached the driver's side window. The glass was heavily tinted, impossible to see through. Joshua tapped twice, a specific rhythm, expecting the doors to unlock. Nothing happened. He tapped again, harder this time. The engine purred evenly, but the vehicle remained sealed. A cold realization settled over Joshua, tightening the muscles in his jaw. He holstered his weapon, wrapped his hand in his suit jacket, and drove his elbow with devastating force into the reinforced glass. It spider-webbed but didn't break. He struck it again. Precision and raw power combining, and the glass shattered inward. Joshua reached in, unlocking the door, and pulled it open. Savannah let out a muffled scream, pressing her hands over her mouth. The driver, a loyal man who had been with Joshua for 8 years, was slumped over the steering wheel. A single, clean bullet hole marred his temple. The blood was still pooling on the pristine leather seat. The trap had been absolute. They hadn't just intended to kill Joshua at the table. They had neutralized his extraction to ensure he couldn't run if things went south. "We're on foot," Joshua said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. He turned back to Savannah. "They'll be coming out that back door in seconds. Can you run in those?" He pointed to her stiff, sensible work shoes. Savannah looked down. They were meant for standing, not for sprinting for her life. She reached down, tearing the shoes off her feet, tossing them into a puddle. She stood barefoot on the freezing, jagged asphalt. "I can run," she said, her voice shaking, but laced with a sudden, desperate resolve. "Follow me. Do exactly what I do. Do not make a sound." Joshua took off down the alley, moving away from the main street. Savannah sprinted after him, the rough gravel and broken glass biting into the tender soles of her feet. She suppressed a whimper with every step, the adrenaline masking the worst of the pain, but the fear was absolute. Behind them, the heavy metal door of the restaurant burst open. Shouts echoed down the brick corridor, aggressive and lethal. There, down the alley, a voice roared. Joshua grabbed Savannah's hand, pulling her violently around a corner, just as the loud, echoing crack of gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked against the brick wall where they had been standing a second before, showering them in red dust. They were navigating a labyrinth of back streets, vaulting over rusted chain-link fences and ducking behind overflowing dumpsters. Savannah's lungs screamed for oxygen. Her dark uniform was soaked with rain and sweat. At one point, as she scrambled over a low cinder-block wall, a jagged piece of rebar caught her calf, slicing a long, shallow gash into her skin. She gasped, stumbling hard onto the wet concrete on the other side. Joshua turned instantly. He didn't yell at her to get up. He crouched beside her, his hands quickly inspecting the wound in the dim light. "Superficial," he muttered. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a pristine, monogrammed silk handkerchief, and tied it tightly around her calf to staunch the bleeding. His hands were surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed. "Can you put weight on it?" "Yes," Savannah breathed, nodding rapidly, terrified of being left behind. "Good." He helped her up. Suddenly, the harsh, blinding beams of headlights swept across the brick walls ahead of them. A black SUV was screeching to a halt at the intersection of the alleyways, effectively cutting off their escape route. 4 men piled out, holding heavy tactical weapons, their silhouettes stark against the high beams. Joshua pulled Savannah backward, pressing them both tightly into a recessed alcove behind a massive industrial dumpster. The smell of garbage was nauseating, but the shadows were deep. "Hold your breath," Joshua whispered, pressing his body lightly against hers to keep her entirely hidden in the gloom. Savannah squeezed her eyes shut, clapping her hands over her mouth and nose. The men approached, their heavy boots splashing in the puddles. The beams of their flashlights cut through the rain, sweeping over the dumpsters, illuminating the trash but missing the narrow gap where Joshua and Savannah were crushed together. "Check the loading dock," one of the men barked. The footsteps moved away, fading slightly into the ambient noise of the rain and distant sirens. Joshua exhaled slowly. "We need a vehicle now." He peered around the dumpster, his eyes locking onto a beat-up, rusted sedan parked haphazardly near a fire hydrant. It belonged to nobody important. Joshua moved quickly, leaving the alcove and approaching the driver's side. He didn't bother checking the door. He shattered the window with the butt of his pistol, reached in, and popped the lock. He slid into the driver's seat, plunging his hand beneath the steering column. Savannah scrambled into the passenger side, her wet clothes sticking to the torn upholstery. She watched in awe and horror as Joshua expertly ripped the plastic casing away, crossing the wires with practiced efficiency. Within 10 seconds, the engine sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. Joshua threw the car into drive, peeling out into the rainy street, leaving the luxury restaurant and the heavily armed assassins far behind. They were moving, but Savannah knew, as she watched Joshua's grim profile illuminated by the passing streetlights, that they were nowhere near safe. The drive was agonizingly silent. Joshua drove with a hyper-focused intensity, weaving the stolen sedan through the city's labyrinthine back streets, deliberately avoiding main thoroughfares and well-lit avenues. He drove erratically, taking sudden turns, doubling back, and watching the rearview mirror with a hawk-like vigilance. He was executing counter-surveillance maneuvers, ensuring they had completely shaken their pursuers. Savannah sat shivering in the passenger seat. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the alleyway was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying reality. Her wet uniform clung to her icy skin. Her bare feet were bruised and cut, and the makeshift silk bandage on her calf was damp with blood. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring blankly at the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Her life had fractured entirely in the span of 30 minutes. After 40 minutes of relentless driving, the city skyline faded, replaced by the decaying, industrial outskirts. Joshua steered the car into a sprawling, seemingly abandoned warehouse district. The skeletal remains of old factories loomed in the darkness like massive rusted monoliths. He pulled into a narrow alley between two colossal brick buildings and killed the engine. "We're here," Joshua said softly. He stepped out into the rain, not waiting for her. Savannah pushed her door open, crying out softly as her bruised feet hit the rough pavement. Joshua was already at a nondescript, heavily rusted metal door set into the brick wall. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Savannah watched as he pulled back a small, hidden panel of faux brick to reveal a state-of-the-art biometric scanner. He pressed his thumb against it, and the heavy door engaged with a loud, mechanical clunk. He pushed it open and motioned for her to enter. Savannah limped inside. The door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into absolute pitch blackness for a terrifying second before motion sensors activated, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent light. It wasn't a warehouse. It was an off-the-book safe house, a ghost property. It was sparse, devoid of any personal touches, but highly functional. There were cots in the corner, a small kitchenette, a bank of encrypted computer monitors, and most importantly, a massive gun safe and a heavily stocked medical cabinet. Joshua walked directly to the cabinet, pulling out a large red trauma kit. He carried it over to a steel table and pointed to a chair. "Sit." Savannah hobbled over and collapsed into the hard chair. She watched as Joshua efficiently laid out gauze, antiseptic, and medical tape. He knelt before her, his expensive, custom-tailored suit ruined, stained with wine, rain, and the blood of the men he had killed. He took her injured leg, his grip firm but careful, and removed the ruined silk handkerchief. He poured antiseptic directly onto the gash. Savannah hissed, her nails digging into the metal edge of the table. "Sorry," Joshua muttered, though his tone remained clinical. He worked quickly, binding the wound tightly. As the pain flared, so did her anger. The shock was receding, replaced by a furious indignation. She stared down at the top of his dark head. "Why did you do it?" Savannah's voice trembled, breaking the heavy silence of the bunker. "Why did you drag me into this?" Joshua finished taping the bandage. He didn't look up immediately. "I didn't drag you into this. You involved yourself the second you slid that note under my hand." "I was trying to save your life," she shouted, the volume of her own voice startling her. Tears of sheer frustration pricked her eyes. "I could have walked away. I should have walked away, and you pulled me into a gunfight." Joshua finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. They were terrifyingly calm, devoid of the panic she felt tearing her apart. "You are naive," he said quietly. "Do you think my associates didn't see you pass that note? The man who was sitting to my left, the one who fired at you, his name is Marcus. He is methodical. The moment the table flipped, you ceased being a waitress. You became a loose end, a witness who actively thwarted an assassination." He stood up, towering over her. "If I had left you in that restaurant, you would be dead right now. They would have silenced you before the police even breached the doors. I didn't kidnap you, Savannah. I pulled you out of the fire." Savannah stared at him, the horrifying logic of his words sinking in. She felt physically sick. "Who are you?" she whispered. "The kitchen staff, they tell stories. But who are you really?" Joshua walked over to the bank of monitors, hitting a switch that powered them on in a cascade of blue light. "My name is Joshua, and until an hour ago, I controlled every illicit shipping route, every underground casino, and every major political bribe in this city. I was the architect of an empire. And now?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Joshua's jaw tightened. "Now," I am a ghost, and someone I trusted implicitly has just stolen my kingdom." He turned back to her, the sheer weight of his presence filling the room. "We are stuck together until I can figure out how deep this betrayal goes. You stay here. You don't touch the door. You don't look out the windows. If someone comes who isn't me, you hide in the reinforced panic room behind the kitchen." Savannah wrapped her arms around herself. The cold reality of the safe house settled into her bones. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a fugitive in a war she didn't understand, relying on a monster to keep her alive. The blue glow of the encrypted monitors cast harsh, geometric shadows across Joshua's face. He had been sitting at the terminal for 2 hours, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with a terrifying, rhythmic speed. Savannah sat on the edge of a cot across the room, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket she had found in a storage bin. The silence in the bunker was heavy, broken only by the clatter of the keys and the occasional, frustrated sigh from Joshua. He was running through protocols, trying to reach his lieutenants on secure burner frequencies. Every call he placed yielded the same chilling result. Dead air, or worse, a subtle, evasive response that told his highly trained instincts that the man on the other end was compromised. Joshua finally slammed his fist onto the steel desk, the impact echoing loudly. He dragged both hands down his face, a rare display of exhaustion cracking his impenetrable facade. "Nothing," he murmured, speaking more to himself than to Savannah. "They've locked it all down. The accounts are frozen. The safe houses, except this one, which was strictly off the books, are compromised. It's a complete purge." Savannah watched him. Despite the fear that paralyzed her, she couldn't help but observe him with the same analytical eye she used to read her demanding tables. He was a man who had built a fortress, only to realize the enemy had been living in the master bedroom the entire time. "How does someone steal an empire in a single night?" she asked softly. Joshua turned the chair to face her. "By holding the master key, I built a syndicate based on compartmentalization. No one knew every piece of the puzzle except me and Elias." "Who is Elias?" "My second in command. My oldest friend," Joshua said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He was supposed to be in Europe securing a new port contract. But this level of coordination, neutralizing my driver, freezing the shadow accounts, turning Marcus against me. Only Elias had the authority and the clearance to organize a coup this absolute." Savannah frowned, her brow furrowing. She replayed the chaotic moments in the restaurant in her mind. The smells, the sounds, the visual details etched into her memory by pure adrenaline. "You said, Marcus, the younger man at the table. He was the one who shot at me?" "Yes," Joshua confirmed. "He handles my street-level enforcement. A blunt instrument, but loyal. Or so I thought. And the older man? The one with the scar? Silvio. He's the old guard. Handles the political payoffs." Joshua shook his head. They both turned. Savannah stood up, ignoring the throb in her bandaged calf. She walked slowly toward the bank of monitors. At the restaurant, she began hesitantly before the man in the coat came in. Marcus was checking his phone constantly. He kept putting it face down on the table. "Standard anxiety before a hit," Joshua noted. "No, it wasn't just that." Savannah pressed, closing her eyes, visualizing the table setting. "When he flipped it over, I saw the lock screen for a second. It wasn't a picture. It was a digital clock. But the case, the phone case, was distinct. It was deep crimson leather, with a gold crest embossed on the back." Joshua stiffened. "A gold crest? 2 rampant lions holding a shield?" Savannah opened her eyes and nodded. "Yes, exactly that." Joshua stood up slowly. the blood draining from his face. That crest, it's the insignia of the Rossi family. They run the eastern seaboard. I've been in a cold war with them for 3 years. Elias has been pushing me to make peace, to merge our operations. I refused. I told him they were butchers. He began pacing the length of the bunker, the pieces violently clicking together in his mind. It wasn't just a coup. Elias didn't just want my throne. He sold it. He brokered a deal with the Rossi family. He gave them me, and in return, they're backing his ascension. That's why the hitman didn't look like one of my own men. He was a Rossi cleaner. Marcus wasn't taking orders from Elias. He was taking orders from the new regime. He stopped pacing and looked at Savannah. A strange, profound respect flickered in his dark eyes. I pay men millions of dollars to gather intelligence for me. They missed the most crucial piece of the puzzle. You, a waitress pouring water, saw the hinge upon which my entire life just collapsed. Savannah swallowed hard. I notice things. When you're invisible, people let their guard down around you. Your observation just changed the board, Joshua said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its despair and gaining a chilling, focused edge. Elias thinks I'm blind. He thinks I'm running scared, trying to figure out who betrayed me. He doesn't know that I know he sold us to the Rossi family. What does that mean for us? Savannah asked, her voice trembling slightly. It means we aren't running anymore, Joshua said, turning back to the heavy gun safe. He inputted a complicated code, and the massive steel door swung open, revealing an arsenal of weaponry and stacks of banded currency. We are going to take it all back, but to do that, I need leverage. And I know exactly where Elias keeps his. He pulled a sleek, suppressed pistol from the safe and checked the magazine. He looked at Savannah, his expression deadly serious. I need your help, not as a bystander, Savannah, as an active participant. I need your invisibility one more time. The plan Joshua outlined was terrifying in its simplicity. Elias, the traitorous second-in-command, was meticulous, almost paranoid. While he had frozen Joshua's accounts, Elias maintained a personal failsafe, a physical ledger. It was an encrypted hard drive containing the names, offshore accounts, and blackmail material of every corrupt politician, judge, and police commissioner on their payroll. It was the true source of the syndicate's power. Without it, Elias could not govern. He would just be a thug with a gun. Where is it? Savannah asked, clutching the coarse blanket tightly around her shoulders. He keeps it in a neutral zone, Joshua explained, laying out a blueprint on the steel table. The Aethelgard Depository. It's a high-end, privately secured vault facility downtown. It operates 24 hours a day, servicing clients who value absolute discretion above all else. No questions, no names, only biometrics and passcodes. Why can't you just go get it? Because Elias isn't stupid, Joshua replied flatly. The moment I stepped foot in that lobby, the facial recognition software would flag me. Elias's men are likely watching the perimeter right now, waiting to see if I'm desperate enough to make a play for it. If I go in, it's a bloodbath, and I lose the element of surprise. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. But they aren't looking for you. You are a ghost to them. Marcus saw you, yes, but he doesn't know who you are. To the security at Aethelgard, you will just be another wealthy, discreet client. Savannah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. You want me to walk into a secure vault run by criminals, steal a ledger from your betrayer, and just walk out? Yes, Joshua said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver keycard and a black biometric thumb drive. Elias is arrogant. He believes he is the only one who knows the specific vault number. He doesn't know that I cloned his access card 6 months ago as a precaution. Vault 814. The passphrase is, "The winter is long, but the harvest is rich." He walked over to a metal closet and pulled out a garment bag, unzipping it. Inside was a sleek, impeccably tailored black dress, a trench coat, and a pair of dark sunglasses. You can't walk in looking like a terrified waitress. You need to look like you own the building. "Put this on. I have shoes in your size." Savannah hesitated. The terror was paralyzing, but as she looked at Joshua, she realized something profound. He wasn't forcing her. He was asking. For the first time tonight, she had agency. If she said no, she knew he would leave her here, protected, and go to his death. But if she helped him, they could end this. She took the clothes. 10 minutes later, she emerged from the small bathroom. The black dress fit perfectly, transforming her posture. The trench coat gave her a silhouette of mystery and authority. Joshua looked at her, a silent nod of approval passing between them. He handed her a small, discreet earpiece. "Put this in. I will be on a secure comms line. I will guide you through the facility. I'll be parked 3 blocks away in a blind spot. If anything goes wrong, if security flags you, if you see Elias's men, you drop the drive. You walk out, and you don't look back. You disappear into the crowd." "I won't drop it," Savannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Joshua stepped closer to her, his presence imposing but no longer frightening. "You saved my life tonight, Savannah. You didn't owe me anything, but you acted. I am trusting you with the only thing that can save us both. Do exactly what I say. Keep your head high, and do not break eye contact with the clerk. Fear is a scent. Don't let them smell it." He handed her a small, elegant leather purse. Inside was the cloned keycard and a fake ID bearing the name Elena Rostova. "Ready?" Joshua asked. Savannah took a deep, shuddering breath, channeling every wealthy, arrogant patron she had ever served at L'Etoile. She lifted her chin, settling the dark sunglasses onto her face. "Let's go steal an empire," she whispered. The Aethelgard Depository was a fortress masquerading as modern art. Located on the ground floor of a massive, black glass skyscraper, its lobby was a cavernous space of polished white marble and brushed steel. There were no tellers, no friendly receptionists, just a single imposing mahogany desk manned by a clerk in a sharp suit, flanked by 2 towering armed security guards whose eyes tracked every movement with predatory precision. Savannah pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors, her black trench coat billowing slightly. Her heart was beating so violently she thought the guards must be able to hear it. "I'm with you." Joshua's voice crackled softly in her ear, a steady, grounding anchor. "Walk slowly. Don't rush. Rushing implies guilt." She forced her legs to move in a measured, confident stride, the heels of her borrowed boots clicking sharply against the marble. She approached the desk. The clerk did not smile. He simply looked up, his expression blank. "Good evening, madam. How may I assist you?" Savannah didn't speak. She opened her leather purse, withdrew the heavy silver key card, and placed it onto the polished wood with a soft, authoritative clack. The clerk picked it up, slotting it into a hidden terminal beneath the desk. He studied his monitor for a long, agonizing moment. Savannah held her breath, her face an unreadable mask behind her dark sunglasses. "Passphrase?" the clerk asked quietly. "The winter is long, but the harvest is rich," Savannah said, her voice surprisingly steady, adopting the icy, clipped tone she had perfected while reciting wine specials to impatient billionaires. The clerk nodded. "Of course, Miss Rostova. Vault 814. Elevator B. The biometric scanner is active." He handed the card back. Savannah offered a curt nod, turning smoothly toward the bank of elevators. "Good," Joshua murmured in her ear. "Elevator B. Once you're inside, press the button for sub-level 3. That's the high security tier. The elevator descent was silent and fast, dropping deep into the bedrock of the city. When the doors opened, Savannah stepped into a heavily fortified corridor lined with brushed steel safety deposit boxes. The air was frigid and smelled of ozone. She found Vault 814 at the end of the hall. It required the key card and a biometric thumbprint. Joshua's cloned drive worked perfectly. The heavy metal box slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside sat a thick, black external hard drive. The ledger, she grabbed it, dropping it swiftly into her purse. "I have it," she whispered. "Excellent. Turn around and walk out. We are almost clear," Joshua replied, the relief palpable in his voice. Savannah stepped back into the elevator, pressing the lobby button. The car shot upward. She let out a long, shaky breath, allowing herself to believe it was over. But as the elevator chimed and the doors slid open to the marble lobby, her blood turned to ice. Standing 10 feet away, talking quietly to one of the armed security guards, was Silvio, the older, scarred associate from the restaurant. He was accompanied by 2 massive enforcers wearing dark suits. They were physically checking the premises. Savannah froze inside the elevator car. If she stepped out, Silvio would see her. He might not recognize her immediately in the new clothes and glasses, but he would look closely. And in this world, closely was enough to get you killed. "Joshua," she hissed, her voice panicked. "Silvio is in the lobby, with 2 men. A sharp intake of breath echoed in her earpiece. "Do not step out. Press the button for the parking garage. Sub-level 1. Immediately." Savannah slammed her hand against the button. The doors began to close just as Silvio turned his head, his scarred face looking directly toward elevator B. For a terrifying fraction of a second, his eyes met hers through the narrowing gap. She saw his brow furrow in confusion, the recognition slowly blooming in his cruel eyes. The doors snapped shut. "He saw me," Savannah gasped, terror entirely consuming her. "Listen to me," Joshua commanded, his voice sharp and absolute. "When the doors open in the garage, you run. Do not look back. I am moving the car to the north exit ramp right now." The elevator descended rapidly. The moment the doors parted to reveal the dimly lit concrete expanse of the underground parking structure, Savannah bolted. She didn't care about looking confident anymore. She sprinted through the rows of luxury cars, her boots slapping against the concrete. Behind her, the unmistakable ding of the adjacent elevator sounded. Shouts echoed through the cavernous space. "There, in the trench coat, stop her." Savannah heard the deafening, echoing crack of a gunshot. Concrete exploded from a pillar 3 feet to her left, showering her with dust. She screamed, ducking low, weaving erratically between parked cars. She saw the north exit ramp, a steep incline leading to the rainy street above. Tires screeched violently, filling the garage with the smell of burning rubber. The stolen sedan drifted around the corner, its headlights blindingly bright, and slammed on the brakes directly in front of her. The passenger door flew open. "Get in," Joshua roared. Savannah dove headfirst into the car, landing heavily on the seat. Joshua slammed his foot on the gas before she even pulled her legs inside, the car tearing up the ramp and bursting out into the slick, wet streets, leaving the echoing gunfire deep underground. Dawn was bleeding over the horizon, painting the heavy rain clouds in bruised shades of purple and violent orange. Joshua had driven them to an abandoned, sprawling shipping container yard on the desolate edge of the city's harbor. Massive, rusted metal boxes stacked like a giant's neglected toys formed a labyrinth of steel and shadows. The stolen sedan was parked in the center of a wide clearing, its headlights cutting through the thick, rolling morning fog. Savannah sat in the passenger seat, clutching the black ledger against her chest. She was shivering, not from the cold, but from the electric anticipation of what was about to happen. Joshua stood outside the car, leaning casually against the hood. He had shed his ruined suit jacket and tie, wearing only a dark, rain-soaked dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing heavily tattooed forearms. He held a burner phone to his ear. "I'm here, Elias," Joshua said, his voice echoing slightly in the damp air, carrying a terrifying, calm authority. "Come, collect your prize." He hung up, dropping the phone onto the wet asphalt, and crushed it beneath his heel. He turned to the car and tapped on the window. Savannah rolled it down. "They'll be here in exactly 4 minutes," Joshua said, his eyes scanning the fog. "Elias won't come alone, but he will come. He has to. Without that ledger, the Rossi family will slaughter him for failing to deliver the city's infrastructure. He is desperate. What do I do?" Savannah asked, her knuckles white. "You stay in the car," Joshua instructed. "The doors are locked. The engine is running. I've wired the ledger to a dead man switch on my phone. If my heart stops, the encrypted contents of that drive are automatically emailed to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the country. Elias knows this. He can't kill me until he physically has the drive and my decryption key." He leaned in closer, his expression softening just a fraction. "When I get him talking, I'm going to draw him out toward the crane." He pointed to a massive, rusted loading crane towering over the yard. "I hid a flare gun under your seat. When you hear me say the word checkmate, you point that gun straight up out the window and fire. Do you understand? Checkmate. Fire, straight up." Savannah repeated, her voice shaking. "Joshua, be careful." He nodded once, stepping away from the car and walking to the center of the clearing, a lone king waiting for his usurper. The low, menacing growl of heavy engines broke the silence of the yard. 3 black SUVs materialized from the fog like wraiths, their high beams blinding. They circled the clearing once, a show of force, before slamming to a halt in a crescent formation around Joshua. Doors flew open. A dozen heavily armed men poured out, forming a perimeter. Finally, from the center vehicle, Elias stepped out. He was a sharp-featured man in a pristine overcoat, holding an umbrella to shield himself from the light drizzle. He looked entirely out of place in the industrial wasteland, projecting an air of false nobility. "Joshua," Elias called out, a smug, triumphant smile playing on his lips. "I must admit, I thought you'd be halfway to Mexico by now. But here you are. Always the dramatic exit. You stole my house, Elias," Joshua replied loudly, his voice steady and cold. "But you forgot to take the foundation." He held up a small black remote detonator attached to his phone. "I have the ledger. I have the decryption key, and my thumb is on the trigger." Elias's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. "You wouldn't. It would destroy you too." "I am already a ghost," Joshua said, taking a slow step forward. "You made sure of that. But if I press this button, Elias, you don't get to be king. You get to be the man who burned the Rossi family's investment to the ground. They will skin you alive." Elias gritted his teeth, stepping forward to meet him, moving away from the safety of his armed guards. "What do you want, Joshua? Money? A safe passage? Name your price." "My price is absolute surrender," Joshua demanded, his voice a whip crack. "You call off your dogs. You transfer the primary accounts back to my control, and you walk away with nothing." Elias laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're delusional. Look around you. I have 12 guns pointed at your head. You have a plastic button. You really think you can negotiate?" "I'm not negotiating," Joshua said, stopping directly beneath the towering shadow of the rusted loading crane. He looked Elias dead in the eyes, his presence radiating an overwhelming, suffocating dominance. "I am explaining the terms of your defeat. Because you forgot the most important rule of the game, Ilias. You never step onto the board until you know where all the pieces are. Joshua took a deep breath. Checkmate. Inside the car, Savannah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy orange flare gun from beneath the seat, shoved it out the open window, and pulled the trigger. With a deafening thwump, a blindingly bright crimson flare shot into the gray morning sky, trailing thick white smoke. But it wasn't just a signal. The flare arc had been perfectly calculated by Joshua. It struck the heavily rusted, precarious latch of the massive cargo net suspended from the crane directly above Elias's SUVs. The rusted metal snapped under the sudden impact and intense heat. With a sound like a localized earthquake, 3 tons of heavy steel shipping chains and jagged scrap metal plummeted from the sky. The massive payload crashed directly onto the 3 parked SUVs, crushing the vehicles flat, setting off a symphony of blaring car alarms and burying half of Elias's armed guards under impassable wreckage. Chaos erupted. The remaining guards scattered in panic, blinded by the smoke and the sudden catastrophic destruction. Elias staggered backward, staring in horror at the crushed remains of his heavy cavalry. He reached frantically for his weapon. Joshua was faster. He crossed the distance in a blur of motion, driving his knee into Elias's stomach and disarming him with a brutal strike to the wrist. Elias collapsed to the wet asphalt, gasping for air, looking up into the cold, merciless barrel of Joshua's pistol. The coup was over. The king had returned. The aftermath was eerily quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the shipping yard smelling of ozone, wet rust, and spilled gasoline. Joshua had used Elias's phone to make exactly 2 calls. The first was to the leaders of the Rossi family, informing them, with the ledger as leverage, that Elias had failed and that the original boundaries of their territories were rigidly reinstated. The second call was to his own, carefully hidden loyalists, the men who had gone to ground when the coup started. They were already en route to clean up the wreckage and dispose of the traitor kneeling in the mud. Joshua didn't execute Elias. Death was too quick a release. He stripped him of his wealth, his contacts, and his name, leaving him for the Rossi family to punish for his failure. Joshua walked back to the stolen sedan. Savannah was standing outside the passenger door, the early morning sunlight catching the exhaustion etched deeply into her face. She still held the black dress coat tight against the chill. "It's done," Joshua said softly, his voice devoid of the terrifying command he had wielded moments before. He looked tired, deeply, profoundly tired. "What happens now?" Savannah asked, looking around the devastated yard. "Now, my people clean this up, and I rebuild." He looked at her, his dark eyes softening, revealing the man beneath the monster. "But you don't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, thick black envelope, holding it out to her. "I made a 3rd call while you were in the vault. This contains a newly minted passport, a clean social security number, and the access codes to an offshore trust in Zurich. It has enough money in it to ensure you and your sister will never have to work another day in your lives. You can buy a house on a beach. You can disappear." Savannah stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she reached out and took it. It was heavy. It was the weight of a new life, bought with blood and terror. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "You could have just let me go. I wouldn't have said anything. Because in my world, loyalty is bought with fear or money," Joshua said gently. "But tonight, you showed me a loyalty born of pure courage. You saw a man about to die, and you risked everything to slip him a note. You walked into a vault of killers for a man you barely knew. You saved my life, Savannah. The least I can do is give you yours back." A sleek Blacktown car, one of Joshua's loyalists, pulled into the clearing, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. It was her ride out. Savannah looked at the car, then back at Joshua. The connection between them was strange, forged in the intense heat of survival. They were fundamentally entirely different creatures. Yet for one night, they had operated as a perfect, lethal symbiote. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Joshua offered a small, sad smile. "If I do my job right, Savannah, you will never see me, hear about me, or know I exist ever again. That is the greatest gift I can give you." He stepped back, gesturing toward the waiting town car. Savannah nodded slowly. She walked toward the vehicle, opening the door. Before she slid inside, she turned back one last time. Joshua was standing alone in the clearing, a dark, solitary figure against the rising sun, the king of a ruined empire, preparing to rebuild his throne. "Goodbye, Joshua," she said softly. "Goodbye, Savannah," he replied. She got into the car. The heavy doors closed, sealing her away from the violence, the cold, and the darkness. As the car drove away, leaving the shipping yard behind, Savannah leaned her head against the cool glass. She closed her eyes, the chaotic symphony of the night finally fading away, replaced by the quiet, terrifying, beautiful promise of a brand new morning. A single, folded receipt. That was all it took to tear down a vast criminal empire and forge an unlikely alliance between two different worlds. Savannah's harrowing story reminds us that true courage isn't the absence of fear. It is the choice to act, to slip the note, to refuse to look away even when the shadows are terrifying. Sometimes, the most invisible, overlooked people hold the power to change the board entirely and save a life. If this intense journey of survival, betrayal, and unexpected bravery kept you on the edge of your seat, please like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories. Your support helps bring these thrilling worlds to life.